Teachers of Reddit, what is the strangest note you have had to write home to parents? Story 1. A teacher had to write a weird note about me when I was in grade 3 to 4. I was playing in this jungle gym thing made of tires, and I was climbing out of the tire, you see. My friend said, "Hey, it's like you're crawling out of a vagina," to which my other friend replied to a girl who was maybe 10 to 15 feet away, "Hey Nicole, Cairo DCK wants to climb out of your vagina." She told my teacher and I got in trouble, even though I didn't say anything. My mom got a note from my teacher saying that I wanted to climb into the girl's vagina and that I shouldn't be thinking that way, but in all fairness, she's really hot now and ID, so get in that. Edit. She also never talked to me after that. She was probably super weirded out by that. Like really, I went to school with her until like grade 10 small school, and we never talked to each other about anything unless we were doing a group project. Maybe she was so flattered that the Cairo wanted to be all up in that. Story 2. Your son tried to milk a female student during the cow presentation. Edit. Story time. I teach kindergarten, but this was a grade 3 class I was supervising. We had a dairy presentation put on by a local farmer that came complete with a milking demonstration. One of the boys thought it would be appropriate to try to milk a female student. He stood in front of her and tried to milk her chest. Awkwardness was had. Story 3. As a swim coach to young kids, some as young as 6, I once had to write a note to the tooth fairy. One of my 6-year-olds lost her tooth while swimming and freaked out. Swim practice came to a screeching halt as I had to put together a search party for the tooth. The kids scoured the pool bottom and to no avail. The tooth was not recovered. Her mom was out of town and the girl began to cry frantically, because without a tooth, she wouldn't get anything from the tooth fairy. Another mom who witnessed the events came up to me with some stationery, and I wrote a note to the tooth fairy listing the events that had happened, ensuring the fairy that indeed, Ella had lost her tooth and was entitled to her prize. TLDR: 6-year-old girl loses tooth at swim practice. I write a letter to the tooth fairy. Story 4. Not my story, but my dad's, who was principal at my high school. There was a kid who was suspected known to be dealing weed to other year 10s one day. Naturally, Dad went with the kid to his locker and told him to empty his backpack. One of the items he pulled out was a small metal box, which given the situation is obviously sus. The kid was told to open the box, but he refused, ran to the nearest rubbish bin and emptied the contents. He was visibly distressed. Thinking he had him done for, Dad went over to the bin, stuck his hand in and pulled out a massive handful of pubes. Apparently the kid was so embarrassed that his mum might find out he'd shaved his privates that he decided to carry them on his person everywhere. He got a letter sent home about failing to follow instructions from a teacher. I can only imagine what the letter said. Edit. Formatting. Edit. 20H. Remembered another good one. My mum worked in the school office at another high school. One lunchtime, a girl ran up to the desk in tears saying she needed to go to the first aid room. You needed to go to the office if you were ill, fill out a form, and then the office staff would call the first aid room with your details. Anyway, the girl didn't explain how it had happened, but she'd ended up with a glue stick stuck right up inside her vagina. I think it's pretty obvious. Mum had to call her dad to explain what had happened, and that he'd need to come and pick her up because there was no way a school first aid officer was going to get elbow deep in a 16-year-old girl. Story 5. I was sent home with a note in 2nd grade. The note simply read, "If Drew 707 is going to eat that much garlic at home, please have him bring some for the rest of the class." The night before, my mom wasn't home and I asked Dad for a snack. He roasted a large head of garlic and gave me some crackers to eat with it. Apparently I reeked. Story 6. Friend of mine works with kids at a primary school. Last week he had to send a note saying that the kid had inserted a crayon in another kid's anus. Edit a word. Story 7. My mother had to write a note home about one of her kindergartens to her father. Basically the gist of what she had to say was, your child has an obsession with asking people about how big their PP is, and following up and saying, "My dad's is bigger, yeah." Story 8. Not a note, but I once had to call a parent to explain that ID confiscated their son's cell phone because he was using it in class. I explained that he claimed to have been day trading. I thought he was being a smartass. His dad says, "Oh my god, he promised he was going to stop that, that's his college fund." Story 9. Way back in elementary school I got suspended for blowing bubbles in the bathroom. They had handed them out for Halloween, and I just wanted to blow them. The weirdest part is that the principal cited that it was a choking hazard on the note home to my parents. When I showed them the note they had a good hearty laugh, and on the day of my suspension I went to see 101 Dalmatians in the movies. Story 10. My wife is a teacher. One day after a science lesson involving scales, she had to write a note home saying, "Your son was very disruptive today. He frequently said that we should weigh our on the scales and give a prize to whomever had the biggest BM. I laughed so hard that I made her save the note. I have multiple copies that I frequently show to friends now. Story 11. My parents got a call from my teacher when I was in 4th grade because I said in class that when people get sad they drink their sorrows away with alcohol. I hadn't realized the question was, what do you do when you're sad? Story 12. When my son was in preschool, I received a note from the teacher that he had been put in timeout for whatever infraction. He was placed behind the teacher's desk while she tended to the rest of the class. He disassembled her chair, with no tools. I also received a parent-teacher meeting along with that note. Edit. He was 3 when he did this. I just asked him how he did it. He used a pair of safety scissors. His tool. We had his IQ tested at 7 using the Woodcock-Johnson test of cognitive ability. His overall score was 137. When he asks a question on how something works I either hand him a book or find some type of model for us to put together. He will turn 12 this summer. Story 13. I used to be a pretty weird chick. The whole anime fangirl thing. Well, I had a phase where I wore cat ears all the time and would meow. No teacher or my parents ever cared since I was a pretty awesome student. But one day my baby brother goes to kindergarten and proceeds to only meow because I would meow at him all the time. His teacher wrote my parents a letter. My mom framed it and has it in her office. Because it is hilarious. Dr. Chick's brother refuses to participate in class discussions and only meows. He caused the entire class to meow and is being very disruptive. He gives me for it to this day when my family brings it up to mock him. Edit. A lot of people know girls who wore cat ears and meowed. This one has always amused and infuriated me. Story 14. My fiancée is a first grade teacher and had to write a note home at the beginning of the school year for one of her students. At the start of the school year, she has to send a letter home asking the parents to provide basic school supplies like colored pencils, markers, hand sanitizer, tape, etc. She had a student take charge and collect the supplies from around the house himself. The student brought in hand sanitizer and used it before heading to lunch. The hand sanitizer wouldn't evaporate and was making his hands warm. He had brought in a small bottle of KY2-in-1 warming gel. My fiancée couldn't stop laughing while she wrote the note to his parents. Story 15. I was conducting a science lab using a diluted biuret solution, a strong base. One student spilled some in a chair and didn't tell me. A girl in the class sat down in it, and soon started feeling irritation in the affected area. I ran her across the hall to the office and got a female staff member to take her to the bathroom with instructions to get her jeans off and rinse the affected area. By the time I returned to the room, another student who had witnessed the event had decided to pour the solution on his hand to see what would happen. I had to write a note home to all the parents explaining the whole incident. Story 16. There was once this kid that may have been mildly retarded, but everyone treated him as a normal kid, so he was in all normal classes. One day during Human Growth and Development or ED, we were watching a cartoon video on masturbation, and about halfway through the video we hear a scream from a female classmate followed by the entire class running out of the class. Turns out he wanted to try what he saw in the movie. This kid has also been caught for wiping boogers in his hair and on other people. Parents must have got a lot of weird letters home. Story 17. Not a note, but a very panicked phone call. The backstory is that I was really more of a mom to my little brother, and I was his emergency contact because it was easier for me to leave school than my mom to leave work after my parents divorced. There was a sign-out sheet whenever you picked your kid up, and being a sarcastic type I would sign him out for all sorts of ridiculous reasons whenever he had a doctor's appointment or something, which was often, because kids anyway, I'm talking zombie apocalypse hookers and blow ninja training. This went on for years. The only one we ever got a phone call about was a pretty innocuous Blues Brothers reference mission from God. An office aide called my mom in a panic to make sure me and the kid weren't going to blow some stuff up, I guess. My mother of course laughed the whole thing off, and I signed him out as mission from definitely not God next time, and no one said a thing. I always thought that it was pretty messed up that they didn't bat an eye at hookers and blow. Edited to add thanks for the love, Reddit. The kid not so much now is actually graduating from high school in a couple of weeks, so we'll make sure to show him this. Story 18. Having to show them what their daughter left me as a sub in a first grade classroom. I received this note after I did calendar slightly different than their everyday teacher. Story 19. The vice principal at my HS called my parents to tattle on me. They reinstated the Pledge of Allegiance after years of not doing it, not sure why, and when the kid who sat behind me didn't say it, I didn't either, just to see what would happen. All the kids who didn't recite the pledge were sent to the VP's office. I overheard the kid say that he was Jewish and it was against his religion to say the words under God, and they let him go without incident. My turn was up next, so I told him that I was an atheist and I didn't believe in God and saying the pledge was against my beliefs. The VP flipped his lid, got right in my face and said things to me like, "How can you look at yourself in the mirror every morning? And you're a disgrace, etc., etc." I was a drum major in the marching band, not a majorette. Big difference, and he asked me how I could salute the US flag during football games when the national anthem was played, and I replied coldly, "Because it's my job." I thought the top of his head was going to blow right off. A little backstory, I was really just doing it to rile this guy up as he was a real jerkwad, and he didn't like me because my older brother was a notorious troublemaker while I was a straight A student and very involved in lots of extracurriculars. The VP was desperate to catch me doing something wrong and had tried and failed to mess with me in other ways throughout HS. It really was a weird Ferris Bueller kind of situation. Looking back at it, dude had some issues. Anyway, VP called my house and got my stepdad, ranted on for a while about how they should pull me from marching band and other unkind things. My stepfather replied gruffly, "I don't give a what she does." Not getting any satisfaction there, the VP went to my music teacher demanding I be removed from band, and he politely refused, saying that it was my choice and that my job with the band was completely separate. That guy was the single most influential teacher I ever had. Long story, but it was gratifying to be supported when I was bucking the system such as it was then, ETA, and getting a lot of comments about fairness, etc., and I'm realizing I should have mentioned that this happened around 1990. Things were pretty different then, so just as a frame of reference. Story 20. So my friend Dan worked at a daycare preschool during one of his summers off from college. He had a 3-year-old student, Jack, that would frequently grab his junk and growl. Well, one day, the kids are changing for swimming lessons and Jack is running around the class naked. The teachers are trying to wrangle him in when all of a sudden, he grabs his junk, growls, and then smacks a little girl in the face with his penis. Dan had to make an incident report for this, and not knowing what to say, writes Jack made inappropriate contact with another student. When Jack's mom came to pick him up, she asked what inappropriate contact was and Dan had to tell her what happened, to which she simply replied, "Oh my." A week later Jack was pulled out of the school. TLDR kid slapped a little girl in the face. Story 21. Well, I'm not a teacher, but when I was in kindergarten I got in trouble for throwing goose at another kid. My teacher sent me home with a note from my parents. My parents had no idea what to do, so they just told me to wash my hands. It was never spoke of again. Story 22. A close friend of mine is a rather attractive 7th grade science teacher. There have been enough incidents read he be jerking it with one student that he was required to have a placemat on his desk with outlines of his hands, so they wouldn't wander below the desk while she was teaching. His parents were surprisingly not shocked. Story 23. My biology teacher wrote up my friend because my gayness was distracting him from across the room. He said he could feel my gayness from across the room. Story 24. In kindergarten my boyfriend and I went into the bathroom together. He then proceeded to take my dress off. At that point the other kids in my class realized we were missing and started messing with the light switch which was outside the door. As I was apparently more scared of the dark than running around in my birthday suit, I sprinted out into the middle of the classroom in nothing but my Wednesday underwear. My parents got a letter warning them of inappropriate behavior and the importance of wearing underwear with the correct day of the week as it had been a Monday. My boyfriend had apparently also pulled the same stunt with my best friend earlier in the day, so that was a fun little nage trois talk. TLDR, some dudes learn how to pimp at a real young age, and day of the week underwear is super treacherous. Story 25. In maybe 2nd grade, I had fallen down I think at recess and sent to the nurse's office. As far as I can remember, I think it just scrapped my thigh, but for some reason I had to go. The nurse needed to spray something on the area, probably disinfectant, and told me I needed to drop my pants. I was maybe 7 so I didn't see the big deal. I dropped them, she sprayed me and I was allowed back to recess. She was very impressed though that I was so brave to drop my pants and called my mom to let her know. I can only imagine how odd that was for my mom to hear the school nurse talk about how brave her 7-year-old son was to drop his pants for her. Story 26. When I was in kindergarten, I remember there was this one kid that would pick his nose so damned much that the teacher notified his parents. That must have been a strange note. Story 27. When I was in 3rd grade, I wanted to breed fruit flies. I did what any 3rd grader who wants fruit flies would do. I let oranges rot in my desk. That was an interesting time for my teachers. Story 28. How about just depressing? My wife has written variations of has a 0% average for the semester because he did not turn in any work or take any tests. This quarter only attended my class 3 times. Left my classroom in the middle of class, entered another classroom, and struck another student. Story 29. I am not a teacher, but I can only imagine how difficult it was for the author of this particular note. Friend of mine at the time was really into masturbating freshman year of HS and one time during PE, decided that he would beat off behind the bleachers. Turns out he was beating off into a shuttlecock. It was badminton day. He comes out from behind the bleachers and just launches the shuttlecock and semen flies everywhere. He is promptly escorted to the principal's office. I can only imagine what it was like to write that letter. Story 30. My mother is a classroom assistant and works with special needs kids. My favorite story of hers is of the kid that licked things. He would lick his desk, the walls, anything really. So one day she had to send this note home. Kid's name was removed from carpet time today because he would not stop licking another student's hair. Story 31. I was at a teacher's conference and there were a pupil that had a short presentation about social media. And he actually opened the front page of Reddit in front of 1,200 teachers and a live internet stream. Could have been a pretty awkward moment, but he did get away with it though. Nothing too bad on the front page. Would have been a great note though showed to 1,200 teachers. Story 32. I heard a teacher tell a story about how one of her 1st grade students always smelled. It became such a distraction in class that she sent the boy home with a note to his parents saying his hygiene needs to be improved. The boy returned with a note from his parents saying he has trimethylaminoria. Poor kid. Story 33. I went to middle school in a very Jewish town, and I told the joke about what's the difference between a Jew and a pizza. My father got called in and the 3 of us were in the principal's office where I had to say the joke. It didn't go well when my father burst out laughing and asked if that's it. I got suspended from school for 2 days, and we went to McDonald's after. Story 34. I think I was in grade 7 at this point. Every year the female GR8s go to the local high school for a women's sports day, and afterwards they get a gift bag which contains some candy, deodorant, and tampons. Well, me being the very mature 13-year-old I was, I found out that if you push the back of the tampon applicator the actual tampon comes flying out, so I was basically shooting people with tampons. So the next day I get on the bus and the bus driver starts bitching about how she found tampons on the bus. She knew it was me, so when we got to school she took me to the office and told the principal. Oh, long story short, he called my parents about the incident, and my mom makes fun of me every day for getting in trouble by shooting tampons at people. Hello Mrs. Grauman, yes, your son was shooting tampons at people and he's in trouble. Story 35. A note wasn't sent home that I know of, but I went to a conservative Christian school and there was a special ed kid that everyone tried to treat normally. We were in health class, and the subject of came up. That hilarious just blurts out, so that's what it's called when my daddy chases my mommy around the house. The entire class was silent for a minute, then erupted in laughter. Story 36. Not me but a classmate. So this guy, let's call him Joe, has been keeping one of those mayo packets in his desk for a while now. So one day in class, he takes it out and starts to play with it, just kind of flipping it around and stuff. All of a sudden we hear this pop. I look over and see Joe's face covered with mayonnaise. I don't think the teacher wanted to write him up, but hey race why the report said instead of doing assigned work, Joe popped a mayonnaise packet under his desk. Mayo went everywhere. Story 37. This will probably get buried, unless there are some kind people reading the new comments, kind of the opposite. I had to bring my parents a note home in preschool because my friend and I got suspended for threatening to hit my teacher over the head with a vacuum cleaner. According to the note, we weren't singing and dancing with the rest of the kids, so we were kept inside for playtime. We sat outside our teacher's office, who just so happened to be the principal, and plotted about how we were going to hit her over the head with a vacuum. Keep in mind, we were 3 to 4 at the time. My mom recently found the letter, and the teacher had written, I kid you not, I have never been more afraid for my life, 3-year-olds. Story 38. I was a teacher in a primary school once, and I had this situation when I was unexpectedly called out of the classroom and came back. I noticed that the students stole my handbag and notes from my desk and hid them somewhere. It took me a lot of threats and persuasion to finally get them back. I wrote a note to the parents of the culprits saying that their children were already starting to experiment with theft. One of the parents called back to me, and she gave out that they didn't give a SH because taking the current economical situation in our country, we'll all have to start to steal to be able to survive. I guess that I wasn't very successful at teaching somebody on morality that time. Story 39. When I was a kid, I had a pretty good note written about me. Each kid had to bring in a book from home for their turn on story day, and unbeknownst to my mom, I brought in this one. It's a book about a giant that attacks a family, and it was amazing to my 6-year-old mind. But apparently it isn't appropriate for a classroom setting or something, so I brought home a note telling the parents that I just wanted to talk about farts to everyone and they should monitor my reading choices. Who do you think bought me the book? Story 40. Most tame was when a boy took a chunk out of a girl's hair with a pair of scissors. Worst wasn't a note home but having to explain to a class that one of their fellow students was taken into custody for the robbery and murder of one of the night school kids. Turned out he wasn't the gunman, just the guy who collected the wallets. Guess which of these happened in an all-white suburban elementary school, and which happened in a very rough, all-black, super impoverished inner-city school. I no longer teach, by the way. Teaching in an low SES environment takes a lot out of you. Story 41. Not a teacher, but a student. I got sent home with a note and suspended in 3rd grade because I couldn't draw. Teacher asked us to draw what we want to be when we grow up. I drew a rocket ship with exhaust fumes blowing out the back. Teacher sent me to the office with the paper. Teacher called home and gave them a note when they came to get me. Note said, your son, Santa Tyler, decided to draw a penis on his assignment today. I don't know what you teach your kid at home, but we don't want a pervert here. My parents laughed really hard, and put the picture and note on the fridge. It is there to this day. I graduate tomorrow. Story 42. I work with preschoolers and have written numerous notes home for biting, spitting and fighting, which are typical. A few weeks ago I had to write an interesting note home and talked with the parents a bit. A bunch of the boys kept coming up to me and said Cameron is following me in the potty and poking my peanuts. This has happened before and I had thought I had the situation under control, but clearly he decided it was time to start doing it again, resulting in the strangest note I have written home to parents. Story 43. No note sent home, but my teacher called my mom for rather an absurd reason. I went to Catholic high school and religion class was mandatory. We had some sort of project in said class, I forget what exactly, about religion in the public eye, and for some reason I wound up investigating the Tipper Gore PMRC claims that heavy metal music was perpetuating the influence of Satan. My teacher got me some really good research materials long before the internet existed, and I did quite a good project on it, and concluded that it was a lot of hysteria. Anyhow, I was taking an after-school calligraphy course as well, and the students often talked to each other during it, and I wound up telling a friend about my project, and she asked about the so-called satanic practices in metal. We were giggling a fair bit about it, and at one point I told her about the claim that Satanists made the backward sign of the cross. She wanted to know what it was, and I demonstrated, and the calligraphy teacher had a total fit, and called my parents to tell them they had a burgeoning Satanist on hand. I guess they took the Catholic thing fairly seriously in those days, despite the school being open to students of all religious backgrounds by law, but I guess not Satanists. Story 44. I've only had 2 notes home for my son and I can't decide which is better. Age 2. Daycare. My entire family has a nickname for my son. We call him Turtle. I failed to mention this to my daycare provider, so at the end of his first week I go to get his stuff out of his cubby and there's this cryptically scrawled note that says, thinks he is a turtle, he thinks his feet are flippers, he insists he is a turtle, am concerned and I thought you should know, TLDR my son thought he was a turtle. The next one wasn't an actual note but a verbal notification from his kindergarten teacher a few weeks ago. She informed me that my son had asked her if there was a Mr. C at home, and when she told him she was unmarried he took it upon himself to try to persuade her to date his father's friend who is also single. This particular friend just so happens to be 50 gay, but that's obviously irrelevant. His teacher seemed mildly disappointed when I told her, TLDR my son was trying to set up his kindergarten teacher with one of his dad's friends. Story 45. My uncle has Asperger's. One day when he was in kindergarten he was asked what he had for breakfast. He replied a quote from Star Trek whiskey and granola bars. There was a call home. Story 46. A few weeks ago my buddy tweeted, on June 10th at 11:28, everyone should their pants senior prank. A few hours later he was called into the principal's office. The principal told him that if anyone actually did their pants he would be held responsible, and that he needed to call his mom to tell her what he did. He called his mom and explained that he, as an 18-year-old high school senior, tried to convince people to themselves. Needless to say his mom did not see the need to be called during work. Story 47. Upon entering the room, I observed your son physically mount his backpack from behind. Despite my constant warnings, he continued to grind himself against the pack until gratification. Story 48. I used to take peanut butter and a spoon to school for lunch because I was still a picky kid. I did this for a while and ended up making a necklace with a plastic spoon on the end. My friends liked it and I ended up making more and sharing my peanut butter. Well, once it got big enough the administration clearly had to put a stop to this. The VP confronted me in the hallway and made me give up my spoon. I did it again and so did everyone else. They took everyone's spoons, said we could no longer do it. I argued it was for my lunch and they didn't they said that it was drug paraphernalia. A plastic spoon on boondoggle around my neck. Mine wasn't so much a note sent home, but a little tidbit added to the school handbook banning plastic spoons on necklaces. That's right, I got plastic spoon necklaces banned for my junior high. That was 13 years ago. My brother went to that same school 2 years back. Guess what rule is still in their handbook? Story 49. In kindergarten, I got sent home for ripping the cotton tail off the bunny class pet. I grew up with a scientist father and knew that it was excess shed, and didn't hurt the rabbit and tried explaining to no avail. Stupid teacher. In the same class not long after, I punched a kid in the mouth for breaking my crayon. He was also got sent home for not wearing underwear under my jumper's dresses. Story 50. Not a note, but my first grade teacher said to my mum when they met for parent-teacher interviews, Smeglister is a smartass. To which my mum replied, yeah, I've noticed. Story 51. Not a teacher but a friend of my family long time ago, had a daughter who would come home with bruises on her left hand. She went to an all-girls Catholic school, and one of the nuns would hit her left hand whenever she would write with it. Girl was left-handed. Father knew this and did the only thing he thought would mend the situation and sent a message to the nun. He walked into her classroom after school one day and put a gun in her face and said, my daughter is going to write with her left hand from now on, or I'll blow your head off. Story 52. Not quite sure what the note said, but in kindergarten, for the few minutes an adult was not watching me, I had this bright idea to get a rock, the same size I was at the time, down a small path, but not all the way down, so I decide to lay down to catch it. A friend pushes it and it rolls over me, crushing me face down into the mud. Pretty horrific sight to see myself in the mirror afterwards. Right, I looked mashed. Story 53. I had my 8th grade band teacher send home a note concerned that I wanted to have with him. My parents confronted me about it and I fell over laughing thinking it was a joke. When I found out they were serious they showed me the note. I vomited and started to cry. I went to school the next day and told him to go himself. When I got to the principal's office I explained the situation and furnished the note. He was nice as pie to me the rest of the year and my dad chaperoned the rest of the band trips that year. TLDR, don't accuse your students of wanting the D. You may get labeled a pedo. Story 54. Today little Timmy expressed that he is in love with me and would like to marry me. I have a couple problems. The first being, I think your son is gay. Sorry to be the one to break this to you, but either he is already learning the ways of messing with a teacher or he has gay feelings for me. The other issue is, well, I'm a 36-year-old grown man and I want to assure you I am not gay nor would I ever consider your son in this kind of manner. I hope we can resolve this as peaceably and quickly as possible. Oh, and one last thing. Little Timmy thinks that we'll be having children one day, may also need to have the talk as well. Talk soon. Story 55. My elementary school always got pissed at me for stupid stuff. My mom was told she needed to come take me home one day, so she rushed from work worried about what happened. I had climbed in the sink and wet my shirt because they hadn't turned on the AC and it was hot as in there. My mom just told them that they should turn on the AC and never to waste her time over something so trivial again. Then she told me she was proud of me for coming up with a solution to my problem. My mom's a boss. Story 56. For me, I never learned that the naked body was a bad thing since it was acceptable to walk around my house naked. When I went to school we were watching some movie or something and I decided being naked was more comfortable. The note just said that I got naked in front of the class while watching Schoolhouse Rock. Story 57. In this case I was the student. We have to write notes for where we were if we come in late at my old junior high school. I was at the orthodontist getting my retainer checked out and my mother had already called that morning so I thought I was fine. So instead of saying I was at the ortho, I wrote my horse had broken down and I had to run in to get repairs. So the principal was not very happy about this and sent a note home saying that I didn't take security measures seriously and that I shouldn't be around farm animals unattended. We had a good laugh about it at home. Story 58. Not a teacher here, but in 2nd grade I was sent to the principal's office, and shortly thereafter home, for interrupting class in order to constantly correct my teacher's grammar, spelling, basic math, and analog clock reading skills. Obviously, no one believes an 8-year-old who claims his teacher was just being mean, and my parents were furious. I was grounded for a week, until they had time to meet with some school officials, the teacher included. My mother, being a college-level English professor, only needed about 5 minuets alone in a room with the teacher to determine that I was, in fact, Not just acting out, I was moved up to 3rd grade, and taken out for Baskin-Robbins and a movie to make up for the week of punishment before the meeting. The offending teacher would give me the nastiest looks the rest of that year, which for 8-year-old Armada 1 was terrifying. She wasn't at the school the next year, and I never did find out what the end consequence for her was. Hopefully she had to take some remedial English and math classes. Edit spelling, show move along, nothing to see here.